Welcome to another edition of Sideline Sanity with me, Michele Tafoya, sponsored by Legacy Precious Metals. There has never been a better time to invest in precious metals. Go to the folks that I choose, legacypminvestments.com, legacypminvestments.com. We so appreciate their support. They are rock stars. Well, today's edition hopefully will get you ready for the new year. There's often a lot of anxiety associated with the passing of one year and the entrance into the new year. I think we set ourselves some standards, some great expectations for New Year's resolutions and the like. Oh, I'm going to lose 10 pounds. I'm going to quit smoking. I'm going to quit drinking. I'm going to be a better parent, whatever it is. And maybe we put too much pressure on ourselves. Dr. Chloe Carmichael is going to help us assess how we might more realistically set some goals. Also, why she believes and why studies prove that free speech is good for your mental health. That and a bunch of other fun stuff with Dr. Chloe right after this.
For nearly 3 decades, she's reported the action from the sidelines. She started very young. She's covered the NBA, NFL, Olympics, and the college football and basketball national championships. And now, during these insane times in our world, Michele Tafoya thinks we need a serious dose of sanity. This is Sideline Sanity with your host, one of the sanest people on planet Earth, Michele Tafoya.
Dr. Chloe Carmichael, welcome. I understand Dr. Chloe is just fine.
Yes, Michele, you can call me whatever you like.
I'm going to call you Dr. Chloe. I've been looking at your blog. I've looked at, you've got a page on Psychology Today. And I think the thing that I am so curious to talk to you about is a piece that you did back in August. Free speech may benefit mental health, the importance of open dialogue. I'm a bit of a free speech absolutist. And I know that in my previous job, I couldn't, as an NFL sideline reporter, really talk about a lot of the things that were eating me up inside, politics and the culture wars and all these kinds of things. And it really ate away at me. And I remember reading anecdotally about women way back in the day, 150, 200 years ago, who weren't really supposed to talk about these issues. And some of them just were like going crazy. It's a really interesting notion that free speech and suppressing it could be negative for your mental health. How did you sort of dive into this topic?
Yeah. So, Michele, I'll just say I'm right there with you in terms of being in environments where we feel stifled, right? So when I was getting my PhD, of course, and starting at Columbia University, I really had to kind of sing a certain song in order to be able to, quote, get by. And then when I was kind of building my practice and getting in media, which was helpful, I knew that there were only certain opinions that I could say, right? And it's hard, And as a clinical psychologist, a lot of my colleagues will talk a lot about hate speech and bullying, which obviously I'm not in favor of hate speech or bullying. But what they don't talk about, what is so surprising to me, is that clinical psychologists, who are usually so much in favor of putting our feelings into words and talking things out, they never stand up for free speech. And so
goodness.
One day I just couldn't stand it anymore. You know what, with all the stuff with, Twitter and Elon Musk and everything, it just poured out of me. I just had to write it all down.
I'm so glad that you did. And you really raised some tremendous points in all of this. Free speech helps people learn and grow was one of your first assertions. And one of the things that bothers me about this notion of hate speech and bullying is like, who gets to decide what is hate speech? If I say, gosh, I don't like blonde psychologists, is that hate speech toward Dr. Chloe? Or if you were to say, sideline reporters are a bunch of bimbos, is that hate speech toward sideline reporters? Like, who gets to decide that? And shouldn't I, as an individual who is strong of mind, be able to handle some words?
100%. And so first of all, yes, free speech does help people to learn and grow. Study after study in psychology shows that when people can talk things through, they arrive at better solutions and they increase their self-awareness, and they're going to be making better, more rational decisions. But to your point as well, Michele, about, what constitutes hate speech in the first place, I think that's a really good one. And in terms of the fact that some people may just hate other people for reasons that we may or may not agree with. And so
Right.
for me, even as a woman, if somebody wants to, they feel that women should not be psychologists and that women are stupid or whatever, I don't want to stop that person from saying those things. And again, this is getting into the second point of the article, that free speech actually helps safe spaces. I
Yes.
believe that I am actually safer knowing how people truly feel about me in the first place. When we prevent people from speaking their truth, if you will, then
Yeah,
that it actually becomes even harder to trust each other. And in my
exactly.
opinion, safety actually decreases when we start stifling speech.
Yeah, exactly. You don't know where this person's coming from, perhaps. Yes, this is point number 2. Free speech helps safe spaces. When speech is prohibited, the viewpoints underlying hateful speech do not disappear. That's correct. The viewpoints don't disappear. Instead, they become subverted. This makes it harder to trust that we are accessing the true views of others. And don't we want to? I mean, isn't truth like the ultimate beauty? Isn't it the ultimate goal of speech and argument and debate?
100%. I mean, so you're actually even getting into something called reality testing. So, truly in psychology, one of the first and most fundamental things that we assess is a patient's connection to reality. And, even getting a little further into it, people may have heard of groupthink, right? Which is where
Yeah.
when you have groups of people and they start thinking and behaving in ways that are totally irrational. Irving Janis, the psychologist who coined the term when he was learning about the Bay of Pigs disaster, one of the things that he actually noticed is that when you have groups of people and there's a false sense of social consensus, meaning it's not reality, there's a false sense of social consensus because there's gaslighting due to self-censorship or top-down censorship. And then we're no longer operating in reality. We're operating in kind of a contrived, manipulated echo chamber. And that is dangerous to our mental health as well as to our decision-making abilities.
Not to mention our democracy. I mean,
Mm.
and that's it's interesting that it came out of the study of the Bay of Pigs. I feel like we're in that space a lot lately. I don't like using that word space, but we're in that. We deal with this even now. The gaslighting, the FBI saying, "Oh, we didn't have any influence over Twitter," and those who are spreading it say that's misinformation. It's like, wait a minute. People are digging for facts. They're looking for truth. And then these authority institutions like the FBI, this is just an example. I don't expect you to comment on this politically, but they're saying, no, don't believe what you're seeing and hearing. Don't, because we're the FBI and, it's like a top down. That's so interesting. And it does feel like a little bit like Alice in Wonderland, upside down world. Like we're not really getting the truth about stuff. And I think it's made people massively distrustful of institutions in this country. Do you know what I'm getting at with
Yeah, of
institutions?
course,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, it's like a false sense of reality. So, I mean, that makes perfect sense.
Your third point, free speech may reduce anxiety and depression. And this is so important. This was what I was getting at. Unable to really be fully myself and express myself and my beliefs and my values as I wanted to, it was a really uncomfortable place. I don't know that it made me anxious or depressed me, but it affected my mental health on kind of that daily basis of I'm not allowed to say anything, it's so do we know this stuff? Is this, do we have more than anecdotal evidence about this?
Yeah. So what's really interesting, okay, is that most psychologists, most people in academia, et cetera, it's a very left-leaning field. And,
Mhm.
because the free speech crowd doesn't tend to be on the left, it's sort of inadvertently become a politicized topic. So to your point, no, there's not necessarily a lot of psychology studies looking at free speech.
Uh,
However, what there are tons of psychology studies that will show, for example, that learning to label our feelings, taking what's inside and putting it into words, slows down amygdala activity. The amygdala, in very simple terms, is the part of the brain that goes into, say, a fight or flight reaction when we have, something really scary happen to us, right? And we can go into the fight or flight space unnecessarily. Most of what psychologists do, well, not most, but a lot of what they do is to help people learn to put things into words so that they don't go into a fight or flight situation over, a difficult conversation. Like they teach people to find their words. But when we actually stop people from doing that because we're trying to stifle free speech, of
mhm.
course, we're actually setting the stage, I think, ironically, for more heightened conflict. Another thing in psychology, to your point, like, is psychology specifically looking at the benefits of free speech in general? No. But what psychology studies will show frequently, again and again, is the benefits of social support, right? Social support is known to be a protective factor against mental health. And so when we're looking at social support, do you think social support would be compromised when you can't speak your mind, when you can't tell people how you really feel? Or if
Yeah.
you're terrified that if you happen to use the wrong word, that overnight is now on the naughty list of words that you're not supposed to use, and then you're really afraid of getting canceled? Of course, I think that would compromise a person's sense of social support, right? So
Yeah.
no, psychology is not really looking, in my knowledge at least, about the benefits of free speech, but they do look a lot at the benefits of talking things through. And that's
Yeah.
why I'm surprised and dismayed that they're not connecting the dots on free speech.
And it is interesting that a left-leaning field, it used to be that the left was all about free speech. And I don't know how things got so flip-flopped, but it is interesting. I think I can think of just family disagreements where I know where a relative stands. And so I have to bite my tongue. And that just makes everything sort of escalate, and it makes me want to leave the room and not talk to that person anymore. And that can't be really healthy, can it?
No, and I don't think that it has to be that way, right? So a lot of people have this knee-jerk, reaction that we shouldn't talk about politics, right? And I get it. There's a time and a place for everything. But
Mhm.
I don't like the idea that we just should never talk about politics, because I feel like we might even just be forgetting how to actually have civil disagreements and learn to disagree peacefully. So, I mean,
Right.
getting back as well, to the point about reality testing and how that could affect those interactions that you're describing. Another falsehood that is being presented as reality is that words are violence, right? So again,
Gosh,
getting back
yes.
to this amygdala response of going into fight or flight, or family members that will feel incredibly attacked, if you simply disagree with them, friends or family members, they may be doing that out of a false belief that words are violence. And I'll tell you, as a clinical psychologist, part of my duty when I'm assessing a patient is to understand whether that person is at risk of harm to self or others. And
Right.
my legal duty is to take action if the person is at imminent risk of harm to self or others. And legally, that means physical violence. It's my job. I don't have a choice if the person is going to physically harm self or others. Now, if that person is planning to sound off on their neighbor with their mouth, I not only am not legally obligated to report it, it is illegal, an illegal breach of their confidentiality if I go alerting authorities and telling people, hey, this guy's going to open up his mouth and say something nasty to his neighbor. So
Right.
legally, there's a clear and obvious distinction about the difference of words versus physical harm. And telling people that words are violence, I believe, is an incredible disservice, not only to our reality testing, but to our discourse.
Yeah.
Because one more thing I just want to add in terms of the psychology piece is that when we are not able to handle conflict with a direct approach by talking it through and asserting where we're coming from, et cetera, if we are unable or unwilling to handle conflicts in a direct manner, we are more likely to resort to passive aggression or acting out, which are generally in psychology considered less favorable. We're usually trying to get people to talk things through because we know that if they don't, then they'll just become, kind of closed off, or they might just be hostile to groups of people without fully understanding why. And we're like, why don't you talk it out with them? And yet we're not wanting people to do that with this whole free speech issue. It confounds me.
You and me both. The other little term that I think of is that phrase, silence is violence. Like if you don't participate in certain conversations, you're actually committing some act of violence. That one bothers me so much because I've got people in my midst who really don't want to get involved. They just kind of want to live their lives. They don't want to go out on social media and say, whatever the latest talking point is politically or culturally. And so this idea that silence is violence is also really, I think it's an unfair pressure to put on anyone to suggest that if you don't speak up about something that I believe in, silence is violence.
Yes, and it also cheapens the concept of what violence actually is,
Yes.
right? I mean, so if we're going to go around saying words are violence, silence is violence, whatever, it's actually cheapening victims of actual violence, and it's lumping in together, say, a domestic batterer with somebody who, verbalizes a something that you disagree with, right? I think, again, we one of the hallmark symptoms of depression is a sense of helplessness, right? We're supposed to have a healthy sense of agency. And if we take that away from people because they have a healthy aversion to being violent, then we're actually guiding them into this place of being apathetic or passive aggressive, and by the way, when we don't connect with our own thoughts enough and we pretend we don't have them, we're more vulnerable to actually going into denial and dissociating from awareness of our own thoughts, which is also bad for mental health. So, I mean, again, it confounds me that more psychologists are not standing up for free speech.
Bravo to you that you are.
Thank you.
Yeah, bravo. Okay, after this break, I want to talk about something. We're heading into the new year. And I know myself, I often put pressure on myself at the beginning of the year to change my habits. And invariably, these New Year's resolutions, I think for so many people, just kind of dissolve by February, right? So I want to talk to you about setting realistic expectations in the new year and really why the new year is that time that we do this. Why can't we do it in May? More with Dr. Chloe right after this. These financial times remind a lot of people of 2008. And if you recall, in 2008, things weren't very good and they're tepid to say the least right now. But back in that era of 2008, those who invested in gold saw significant gains and others simply lost their retirements. So why am I bringing this up? Because gold and silver, maybe you want to make them a part of your portfolio. And the only people I trust when investing in gold and silver are legacy precious metals. And they will answer all of your questions and educate you on how you can put gold in your portfolio, whether it's in your IRA, your 401k, whether you buy physical gold and keep it in a safe deposit box, whatever is best for each individual. These folks will help you out. and inform you about how gold is a hedge against inflation and protects against a weakening dollar. These are things that stocks can't do. So get a hold of Legacy Precious Metals and do it while there's still time, while you've got a chance for a long-term play here that will protect your retirement. Go to legacypminvestments.com or give them a call at 866-528-1903, 866-528-1903. You can also download their free investor's guide at legacypminvestments.com, legacypminvestments.com. Dr. Chloe, this notion of New Year's resolutions, which I remember being taught as a kid, okay, what's going to be your New Year's resolution? And it would be like, I'm going to take better care of the dog, or I'm going to clean up my room. And then as adults, we get into things like, I'm going to lose 10 pounds. I'm going to stop drinking. I'm going to exercise, or whatever it is. What do you think about this notion of New Year's resolutions? Is it good for the brain or maybe not so good?
Personally, I would say yes. Okay. With the caveat that every person is different. And so for some people, if you just know like that you make a resolution and it becomes overwhelming and you end up just acting out in a negative way, like you said, you say you're going to lose 10 pounds, but then you end up gaining 20 just to, prove something to yourself that you can't be controlled by that resolution. If you know that it's just not healthy for you, then don't do it. However, there is something to be said from a psychology perspective about actually being clear about what are your areas for growth, what does growth look like for you, and how could you potentially try to get there, right? So in psychology, we have what's called your ideal self or your aspirational self, and that's compared, with your actual self. And that's okay. There's supposed to be a bit of a discrepancy. So we're supposed to have certain areas that we're targeting that we want to get to. Where most people get stuck is in perfectionism with their self-talk and the way that they deal with it when they do fall short. Because it's almost inevitable that, suppose my resolution is that I want to learn how to hit a home run at baseball, right? Odds of me just walking up and picking up the bat and doing that are very low. I have to accept that it's going to be a struggle. There's going to be grappling. And it's the way I handle that moment of grappling that's the biggest predictor of success.
I want to get back to that, but I want to pick up on something you said earlier. You said, what if our resolution is to lose 10 pounds, but then we gain 20 just to prove to ourselves that we can't be controlled? That is fascinating. That actually goes on in the brain?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think, to be honest, even me, right? Okay. So, I'm a don't tread on me type of person, right? And so, if we're, making a resolution and saying, okay, I'm going to, lose 10 pounds. And so I set out a diet for myself and I follow it in a almost punishingly, perfect manner for the first month. Odds are at some point I'm going to say, you know what? I'm going to do what I feel like, right? I mean, it's yo-yo dieting personified. If we're too hard on ourselves or too controlling in ourselves, there can then be a bit of a backlash or a rebellion that can crop up.
That's so interesting. That is so interesting. I never really thought about it that way, that we're too hard on ourselves and we finally go, screw it, I'm done with this. I'm going to just binge. But that makes all the sense in the world. And then, this idea of perfectionism. And then beating ourselves up. I was thinking about this the other day. I jumped on the Peloton and I was riding my bike and I thought to myself, gosh, my output wasn't nearly what some other people's are. And then I thought, why am I comparing myself when I actually made the time to spend an hour on the bike? Isn't that enough? And, and I tried my hardest. I really did. I did my best. Where do we get this idea that we have to be the absolute best or we have to be perfect?
Mm-hmm. So we want to avoid black and white thinking there. Okay. So there's actually a certain amount of social comparison and healthy competition that can be healthy, right? You of all people know that, right, Michele, as a sports, person,
yeah.
right? However, for some people, they can let that kind of competitive factor become a cudgel that they use against themselves. And that's actually what the problem is the attitude towards the self. It's not just the fact of social comparison. And I say that because I don't want people to say, okay, well, that's it. I'm just done comparing myself to others, because that's not realistic. And it's actually not even entirely helpful. So a certain amount of attunement and awareness and saying, you know what? Other, working moms are able to get on the treadmill 3 times a week for 20 minutes. And so maybe that could inspire me and give me, again, reality testing if I have a belief, that as a working mom, I just can't make that happen, right? So there is a certain amount of social comparison that's healthy. But as you said, we also have to give ourselves credit for what we are doing. And for me, as a psychologist that works with a lot of very driven people, a lot of times what I find is that they don't want to give themselves credit for those things because they're just so focused on their areas for improvement. Now, there is a certain amount of, again, positivity about noticing where you need to improve, but we can't do that so much that we deprive ourselves of the positive feedback for what we are doing. So again, going back to your sportscaster days, when we think about the very, very best coaches that get the very best performance out of their players, they don't just say, oh man, you're doing fine. You're okay just the way you are. But they also don't just give nothing but negative feedback. They find that kind of firm but fair way of getting it out of them. And if I may, in my book, Nervous Energy, Harness the Power of Your Anxiety, I
have the book. I meant to bring it. I'm glad you held it up.
Of
yes.
Course. I have a tip in there for that. There's a whole chapter about perfectionism. And one of the things I really suggest for people is that when you find yourself backsliding on a resolution or any skill that you're trying to build, the first thing you should do, and this is going to sound counterintuitive, but the first thing you should do is actually congratulate yourself on the awareness of the backslide or the mistake. And the reason you do this is because if you think about it, non-awareness is actually even worse, right? So suppose that you said you're going to work out 3 times a week and then it just like goes off your radar and it's like you didn't even think about it again until June. But if it's in your mind in January, you're like, oh, I'm not doing it. And you, instead of just going directly to beat up on yourself, I would encourage a person to say, wow, well, good for me that this is obviously on my radar. I'm willing to think about it. And then the next thing you do is you challenge your brain with a question. Instead of going into any judgment, you go to a question, which is, how can I better support myself to make this happen for myself, next time? And then that way you're keeping the awareness in a solution-focused way, which will help you reach your goal much better than wasting the energy on just beating yourself up.
That is so important. I'm so glad you mentioned this because I think the instinct or the reaction for so many of us is, damn it, I haven't done it. And what a loser. I cannot believe I wrote this down. I was going to do it. Oh my gosh. Someone pour me a pina colada because I'm just, and make it worse. And so that question of how can I make this happen? One of the things that comes to mind as you're saying all this, Dr. Chloe, is this notion of time. There's only, so much time in a day and we need a good night's sleep. And so I feel sometimes like, boy, there's just not enough time for me to get all the things done that I want to get done. And even now into my 50s, I think, how have I not learned that, I continue to beat myself up for not doing more in any given day.
Well, so obviously we want to make sure that we're giving ourselves a realistic workload, right? Also, for people who are very accomplished and used to doing things themselves, and then they take on more and more responsibility, there just naturally will come a tipping point where we've taken on so much that we can't do as much, which is when we want to start getting creative about delegating, right? So delegating is a really good skill. So I would encourage people to be, looking around for ways that they can get their family members to help out more with the house, or, maybe hire a virtual assistant to, navigate, scheduling those dental appointments or whatever the case may be. And certainly as well to at least even become intentional and methodical about what the order of importance is, right? So if you know that there's 10 things on your list and there's only enough hours to do 8 of them, let's be intentional and choose which things those are. And then I think we'll have a greater sense of peace about it if certain things get rescheduled for a different day.
There's so much good advice that you've just given, and I do want to mention your book again because it's a really friendly read. Like I mean that in the best of ways. That when you open a book, often about psychology or about, in this case, nervous energy, you think I'm going to get this really clinical, statistically this data, and while there's enough of that, it's very warm and inviting and accessible. It's called Nervous Energy, Harness the Power of Your Anxiety by Dr. Chloe Carmichael. I want to make sure, why don't you hold it up again, Chloe, so that people can see it. It's done.
There it is.
Ratings on Amazon are great. Almost perfect 5-star ratings on Amazon. And so I'd like to encourage people, this might be a good time of year to get it. Might be a good holiday gift for people who have nervous energy and anxiety and can put it, use it in their favor. I am certainly one of those people. Dr. Chloe, I'd love to have you back. There's so much to talk about, and you're just an excellent representative of your field. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas. She is Dr. Chloe Carmichael. The book is Nervous Energy, Harness the Power of Your Anxiety. So with that, thanks for listening to Sideline Sanity. Be brave and do good. Happy to talk once again with Charles Thorngren, the CEO of Legacy Precious Metals. I think it still is confusing to people, some people, as to why a precious metals investment would be a worthwhile one, particularly at this time when they're thinking, I'm doing all I can to put gas in the car. Why is now a particularly good time? And we'll go from there to how small of an investment is worthwhile for someone.
A great question. And I think the importance of why really comes into the fact that we have to save for ourselves, whether it's a little here, a little there, whether it's making it a plan and putting out so much a paycheck, whether it's making sure we fund our retirement account. We have to realize we are responsible for ourselves in the long run.
You mean that no one else is going to ride up and save us, on some white steed?
It ain't going to happen. It ain't going to happen. And anyone who's promising to do that is getting ready to take advantage of you in some form or fashion.
Yeah. And so if I'm an investor, a potential investor, and I'm looking at Legacy Precious Metals and I'm saying to myself, this sounds smart. I don't have a lot to spend. What would you tell that person?
I would say, do what you can. If you never start, you never get there. So the most important step you can take is saying, I'm going to take care of myself and my family. I'm going to make it a plan. I'm going to take action. I'm going to start in the way that's comfortable for me. That's the important thing. The first step is always the hardest. But once you take that first step, the second step is easier. And then you're moving. And then once you're in motion, it's hard to stop you. So that first step, most important step.
I always tell people they can call and talk to an IRA expert or check out the guide that they can download for free, the Investor's Guide. What is the number one question that you get from people who are first-time investors?
The biggest question I get is this right for me? That is the question.
And that comes from everyone. So everyone's asking the same, is this right for me? And yet we're all so unique. And yet it is a sound investment for just about any portfolio, isn't it?
It is. Even though we're all unique, that uniqueness is going to tailor the way we begin the investment. Okay. But we're all in the same situation. That's the one thing I think we seem to forget in today's society. Whether you agree with somebody or not, we're in this together. America is in this transition that we're in right now. We're dealing with the same issues. Some people like them, some don't. But we're all in it together. right? So the need is the same. How we prepare and how we invest is what changes from person to person. But we all have that same need.
It's a great point. And again, I encourage people to just make the call, pick up the phone. That step is always the hardest. I'm not sure why that is. In any kind of effort that you make in life, whether it's weight loss or exercise or investing some way to better your life, it always seems like that first hurdle is the challenge. But when they call, who are they going to talk to? What's going to be on the other end of the line for them?
Great question. You're going to speak with one of our customer representatives, and their job is not to sell you metals, right? We have a much different approach. We're going to answer all your questions. We're going to show you what options you have. And on the rare occasion, this isn't right for you, we're going to say, this probably isn't right for you. We have a gold company here, but I say it all the time. What we actually deal in is customer service. We want each and every individual that calls to get the answers they need, to be able to make the decision that's right for them. And we want to do that in a way that's not pushy, that's not salesy. And that's what makes my team so special. We care about each and every caller. And we're going to show you what options you have, and then you get to make an informed decision. So don't be afraid of the phone call. It's the best thing you can do.
And this is why I am so honored and I feel privileged to be sponsored by Legacy Precious Metals. They're the ones that I'm going to deal with. And I encourage you to pick up the phone, give them a call. Even easier, go check out their guide. It's a free investor's guide at legacypminvestments.com, legacypminvestments.com. But as you said, Charles, pick up the phone. You're going to talk to someone who can answer your specific questions and get the ball rolling, get started, do something that is a long-term play for your family's benefit. Charles, it's always great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's always great to be here.